You watch the full story. You know the murders. You know the letters. You know the suspects. But there are things about the Jack the Ripper case that almost nobody talks about. Things that change the way you understand the entire story. 3 secrets that most documentaries skip over completely. 1 theory about his identity that is more compelling than anything you have heard before. And the truth about the 5 women at the center of this case. A truth that history got completely and inexcusably wrong for over 130 years. This is what they never told you about Jack the Ripper. Here is the first thing most people don't know. Jack the Ripper may have been stopped, not caught, not arrested, not charged, but stopped, face to face, by a police officer who had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. On the night of the double event, September 30th, 1888, the night Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both murdered within 45 minutes of each other. A Metropolitan Police officer named P.C. William Smith reported seeing a man near Dutfield's yard approximately 30 minutes before Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered. The man was white, approximately 28 years old, 5 feet 7 inches tall, respectably dressed in a dark coat and a hard felt hat, carrying a parcel wrapped in newspaper approximately 18 inches long and 6 inches wide. P.C. Smith did not stop the man. There was no reason to. He was simply a man walking on a street. But here is where it gets chilling. Approximately 45 minutes later, after both murders had been committed, P.C. Long found a piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron in a Golston Street doorway. Above the apron piece on the brick wall were the now famous chalk words, "The Jew's Message," written in white chalk. And witnesses in the Golston Street area reported seeing a man matching almost exactly the same description as the man P.C. Smith had seen near Dutfield's yard. Same height, same age, same dark coat, the same man, walking away from both murder sites. Stopped by nobody. The Jack the Ripper case may have ended on the night of September 30th, 1888 if one police officer had asked one more question. He didn't. And the Ripper killed twice more before disappearing forever. Here is the second secret. The letters almost certainly were not from Jack the Ripper. I know. That surprises people every time. The Dear Boss letter. The saucy Jackie postcard. The letters that gave the world the name Jack the Ripper. Most serious ripperologists today believe they were almost certainly written by a journalist. Here is the evidence. The Dear Boss letter arrived at the Central News Agency on September 27, 1888, signed Jack the Ripper for the first time. The Central News Agency was not a police station. It was not a newspaper. It was a wire service that distributed stories to newspapers. Why would a serial killer send his taunting letters to a wire service rather than directly to the police or a specific newspaper? Because a journalist working at or connected to a wire service would know that a letter sent there would reach the maximum number of newspapers simultaneously, generating the maximum possible coverage. The language of the Dear Boss letter is also suspiciously journalistic, confident, well-structured, written by someone who understands how to construct a compelling narrative. The misspellings and crude language feel performed rather than natural, like someone deliberately writing down to a character rather than simply writing. Chief Inspector John Littlechild, head of the Special Branch during the Ripper murders, wrote in a private letter discovered in 1993 that he always believed the Dear Boss letter was written by a journalist named Tom Bulling, who worked at the Central News Agency. Tom Bulling, a journalist, at the very agency that received the letter. If Littlechild was right, and most modern researchers believe he probably was, then the name Jack the Ripper was not chosen by the killer at all. It was invented by a journalist trying to sell newspapers. And it worked. 131st, 1888, when Polly Nichols was found on Bucks Row. 2 women in particular. Emma Smith, April 3, 1888. For months before the canonical murders began, Emma Smith was attacked by a group of men on Osborne Street in Whitechapel. She survived long enough to reach the London hospital, where she died of her injuries the following morning. The attack was initially attributed to a gang rather than a single killer and was excluded from the canonical list. But some researchers argue that the nature of the attack and its location in Whitechapel suggests it may have been the Ripper's first attempt. Disorganized. Incomplete. The work of someone who had not yet fully developed the method he would use in the canonical murders. Martha Tabram. August 7, 1888. 3 weeks before Polly Nichols. Martha Tabram was found on a landing in George Yard Buildings in Whitechapel with 39 stab wounds, a frenzied attack suggesting either extreme rage or extreme inexperience. Many serious ripperologists believe Martha Tabram was the Ripper's second victim, and that the escalating organization and precision of the canonical murders, from Polly Nichols through to Mary Jane Kelly, represents the development of a killer who was learning and refining his method with each attack. If Martha Tabram was the second victim and Emma Smith was the first, then the Jack the Ripper case began not in August 1888, but in April 1888. 7 months of terror instead of 11 weeks. And 2 more women whose names deserve to be spoken. Emma Smith, Martha Tabram, say their names too. Now for the identity theory that changed everything. In 2014, a businessman named Russell Edwards published a book claiming he had solved the Jack the Ripper case. His evidence centered on a shawl allegedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder in Mitre Square on the night of September 30th, 1888. The shawl had passed through private hands for over a century before Edwards acquired it and submitted it to forensic analysis. The analysis, conducted by Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a molecular biologist specializing in historical DNA, identified 2 significant findings on the shawl. First, mitochondrial DNA from a female source consistent with Catherine Eddowes herself, confirmed through a living female descendant. Second, mitochondrial DNA from a male source consistent with Aaron Kosminski, confirmed through a living female descendant of Kosminski's sister. Edwards and Louhelainen concluded that the DNA evidence identified Aaron Kosminski as Jack the Ripper. The scientific community responded with significant skepticism. The chain of custody of the shawl was questioned. Could it be definitively proven the shawl was actually from the crime scene? The methodology was disputed. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited by millions of people and cannot definitively identify a specific individual. The peer review process raised concerns about the analysis. But in 2019, a revised and peer-reviewed paper by Louhelainen and a co-author confirmed the earlier findings with additional analysis, this time identifying a genetic mutation in the Kosminski DNA sample that narrows the match significantly. The scientific debate continues. But here's what we know about Aaron Kosminski beyond the DNA. He lived in Whitechapel. He had a documented violent hatred of women. He was reported to police by his own family for threatening behavior with a knife. He was committed to a lunatic asylum, Coney Hatch, shortly after the murder stopped. The murders stopped when he was institutionalized and never resumed. Senior Scotland Yard investigators who knew the case from the inside, Donald Swanson, Robert Anderson, both indicated in their private writings that they believed the killer was a Polish Jew who was identified by a witness, but never prosecuted, because the witness refused to testify against a fellow Jew. Aaron Kosminski was a Polish Jew. He was identified in a lineup by a witness who then refused to testify. The DNA evidence, disputed but not disproven. The institutional record. The senior investigator annotations. The timing of his committal and the end of the murders. Aaron Kosminski is not a confirmed answer, but he is the closest thing to one that 130 years of investigation has produced. And now the most important section of this entire video. The truth that history got completely wrong about the 5 women at the center of this case. For over 130 years, the dominant narrative about the canonical victims described them in a specific and deeply unjust way. They were described as fallen women, as casualties of their own choices, as people whose vulnerability was somehow their own fault. This narrative was wrong. It was wrong in 1888, and it is wrong today. Here is the truth that researchers and historians have spent decades fighting to establish. Polly Nichols was not defined by her poverty. She was defined by her resilience. She survived the collapse of her marriage. She survived the workhouse system. She survived the streets of Whitechapel for years. She was trying, on the night she died to earn 4 pence for a bed. 4 pennies. That was the entire cost of her survival on August 31st, 1888, and she was out earning it because she was a survivor. She was not a fallen woman. She was a woman who had fallen on hard times and was still getting up. Annie Chapman was not defined by her circumstances. She was defined by her creativity and her kindness. She made artificial flowers and sold them on the street. She crafted something beautiful with her hands in the middle of extraordinary difficulty. People who knew her consistently described her generosity, giving what little she had to people who had less. She was not a cautionary tale. She was an artist surviving in impossible conditions. Elizabeth Stride was not defined by her struggles. She was defined by her courage. She left Sweden alone as a young woman and built a life in a foreign country in a foreign language. She survived the loss of her husband. She survived years of hardship in the East End. She was alive in the way that people who have fought for everything are alive, fully, presently, with nothing taken for granted. She was not a victim of her choices. She was an immigrant woman of extraordinary resilience. Catherine Eddowes was not defined by the night she was arrested for being drunk. She was defined by her wit and her warmth. She could make anyone laugh. She was sharp and clever, and people sought out her company. She had lived a full and complicated life. Relationships, children, hardship, joy. She was not a statistic. She was the funniest person in any room she entered. Mary Jane Kelly was not defined by her youth or her vulnerability. She was defined by her voice. She sang. Late into the night, her neighbors heard her singing Irish folk songs from her small room at Miller's Court, the room that should have been her sanctuary. She was 25 years old. She was singing the night before she died. She was not a tragedy. She was a singer. These are the truths that history buried under 130 years of mythology about a killer. Polly was a survivor. Annie was an artist. Elizabeth was a pioneer. Catherine was the funniest person in the room. Mary Jane was a singer. Remember them that way, not as victims, as people. 3 secrets, 1 theory, and 5 truths that took 130 years to fully tell. The Jack the Ripper case is not just a mystery. It is a mirror. It reflects what happens when a society decides that certain people are invisible, when certain lives are considered less worth protecting, when the system designed to keep people safe decides, consciously or unconsciously, that some people are not worth the full effort of that protection. The Ripper chose Whitechapel because he believed nobody would care. He was almost right. But 130 years later, we are still caring. We are still saying their names. Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary Jane, Emma, Martha. All of them. Say their names. If this video gave you something new, something you didn't know before, please like it and share it with someone who should hear it. Subscribe to Home of Mystery for more deep dives into the cases and the people that history forgot to tell the whole truth about. New videos every week. Until next time, say their names.